Hi everyone, welcome back to another Turning 101 video. So, today's video is not going to be about turning in a certain way. Today is going to be about processing lumber, because that is a very, very important part of wood turning. Now, if you're like me and you don't want to spend hundreds of dollars on wood, because you can go buy blanks at stores. There's a bunch of stores here in the region where I'm from that sell bowl blanks and sell wood to make projects, but it's expensive. It is expensive as it's expensive, and that's okay. If you have the budget for it and you don't want to go out looking for stuff, that's fine. But if you don't have the budget for it, there's ways around buying stuff that is very, very simple, and you can get very nice projects out of it. I think 99.5% of everything that I have, all the projects you've seen, everything I put on my channel is all 99.5% found and collected wood from wherever. Now, obviously, I am also an arborist as my job, so it does come in handy. But before I was an arborist, I also was able to collect wood in great quantities. So today we're going to be going over how to process the wood you find, and also where to look for all your different types of wood. Alright, so the first thing to do, put my gloves on because it's cold out. The first thing to do when you're collecting lumber, okay, is to identify the splits. So as you can see here, there's a few splits in this log. There's a big one here. There's a big one here. There's a big one here. There's a few little checking marks here. A bunch of little check marks there, but those are the major splits. And as you can see, these major splits originate from the pith, which is the center of the tree. Now, this is a dried log. This has been probably cut a while back, because I remember it's my buddy's house. This is what he used for chairs on the side of his fireplace, and I remember sitting on this log a couple of times for the past couple of years. So this has been there for a while. However, if you're collecting green wood, so freshly cut trunks, that's not going to happen. There's going to be no checking within the tree. It's going to be pristine because it's just been cut. And that's what you want. You want to collect wood when it's just been cut to control the drying process, as you've seen in the previous Turning 101 videos on rough turning bowls. Now, the first thing you always want to do is remove the pith, because that is what is going to cause all the cracking in the wood, all of it. As you can see, all these major splits originate from that center. So that you want to get out as soon as possible. Now, this has been cut a while back, so it has had time to move and crack. So if you have a piece like this, now you have to get a little bit more creative on how you're actually going to get the splits out. Now, there's three methods of making bowl blanks. There's just the simple method of cutting straight through the pith. I don't like that method that much. The reason for that, yes, it does allow you to get more wood, more big size blanks out of your pieces, and that's true. However, if you just cut along the pith with your chainsaw, there's still tension in these rings right here, right? And if you still have tension in these small rings that technically aren't cut, they might still split. However, if you cut, I think it's a half an inch, or even just a little bit less than a half an inch on each side, you remove those rings that have lots of tension, and then you have even less chance of cracking. So I think that it's still worthwhile to do it, even if you lose blank size, because in the long run, your bowl is going to be a little bit more sturdy or stable when it's fully dried. So that's my personal take. However, for highly figured wood like crotch pieces, then I do think that just cutting the pith is the best, because the highly figured wood is really in the center. It's not really on the sides. So if you cut a center slab out, you kind of lose that big figured pattern. Now, I'm just going to stretch my legs a little bit. Anyway, so now there's a few different ways that we can cut this. So, cut this. Now, I really like this bark. So I know that I want to make at least one live edge bowl out of this. So the bark is better on this side, because I checked the log before. So this side I'm going to leave the bark on. Now first we have to draw our lines to where we're gonna cut the center slab out. So as I said, you want a little bit, oh, this Sharpie's kind of dying. I'll change that. You want a little bit on each side of the pift, right? So this is actually quite a sizable chunk. And you might say, well, Matthew, that takes away a lot of my bowl. Well, yes, and it sucks because it does, which is why, for example, I like to always say, if you want to make a 16-inch bowl, you need an 18 to 20-inch diameter log. Now, that might sound weird, and you might be like, well, wouldn't I just need a 16-inch diameter log? No, because you have this bark, you have this that you're going to take out, you have the spot you're going to take out for the tenon. So if you want a really perfectly cylindrical blank of 16 inches, you need a 20+ inch log to really get that blank perfectly symmetrical. So out of this, I might get a 10-inch bowl or even less. And it's not the best, and if you want bigger pieces of wood, that's what you need to get. If you want bigger bowls, you need bigger pieces of wood. But I always advocate, and this is something that I didn't do when I started, trying to get a super big bowl really flush out of the log is not as effective than getting smaller bowls. Why? Because first of all, there may be cracks that are still originating in the bowl. Second, you might have weird shapes because of the bark. There's a bunch of different things, but I always try to get the perfectly cleanest blank I can. And even if that ends up being a lot smaller than I would have liked, it's going to be a better quality bowl than if I would have just stayed big and kind of have to deal with all the problems. But this isn't a complete loss, because even though that you do lose this center, once that's cut out, you cut a section here and a section here to really get that pift area completely out of the log. And then you have two nice quarter sawn pieces of wood, which if you're trying to make axe handles or spindle blanks or tool handles, this is the wood you want. It's beautiful, it's nice grain pattern. You could also get a split grain pattern, so you see a very dark heartwood here, a very light sapwood here. So if you make a bowl on the plank like here, you get a nice contrasting colored bowl. So that's something that I do recommend doing. Now, this side is going to be a live edge, a little bit of loose bark, which is common from hickory. Nice. So I want to keep the bark on here. Here I want to make a standard bowl. Now the way to make a standard bowl, I always enjoy making a spot for my tenons. So I always like cutting a little slab off just to allow me to cut perfectly round on the bandsaw. And it allows me to have to take off less material when spinning. It's just an easier way of doing it. It makes it easier to cut on the bandsaw. I just like to do it like that. Now, you might be wondering, well, what am I going to do with these splits? Now, the reason I cut it this way is because I have this Y shape. Now, cutting it this way allows me to cut this part of the crack out, this full split out, and I only have these little sections. Now, I don't know, and this is why it's kind of a gambling game, you don't know how far these split go in. They could go in 2 inches, they could go in 4 inches, they could go in all across the end of the log. You don't know. You can kind of give yourself an idea on what's happening on the other side, but without flushing out a cut like this, so just topping out a little inch of wood just to get a nice clean surface, you cannot tell for logs that have been there for a while. So it's a guessing game. And if I really didn't want to make a bowl out of this, I'd have to cut another slab out, get another piece of quarter sawn wood, another piece of quarter sawn wood, and cut these blanks out. But I really want to try and make a bowl out of this. So I'm going to chance it, and I'm going to cut them like this. And if they go all the way through, then I'll readjust. But for starting out, I'm going to cut here and here. So let's go get the chainsaw, and we'll be doing that. All right, so we have out the John Sured. So this is the chainsaw I'll be cutting with. This is a John Sured 625, and it has a beautiful 28-inch bar on it, full skip chain, full chisel chain, comp chain. This is a 62.5 cc saw. I always recommend using 60 plus cc saws for this kind of stuff. Ripping is hard on chains, it's hard on saws, so you want to have a powerful chainsaw for this. So for ripping, I always recommend, in reality, if you really go to my full recommendation, I might do a video on this in the future, but I'd go 70cc. Really, 70cc allows you to buck anything. It allows you to buck any size. It allows you to run up to 32-inch chains, bars and chains. So I recommend 72cc. 62 works just fine as well. You just have to be a little bit more careful on what you cut with. Hickory is quite hard wood. This is dry, so this will demand a lot on the saw, so you have to go slowly. Another thing is the bar. Now you might be saying this is a very long bar, you don't need that much bar. I tend to disagree. When you're ripping boards, you want the longest possible bar so that you do not get offcuts or not scissor cuts, but you don't want to get your cuts off. If you mistake one cut on one side and then go on the other side to finish your cut and you miss, you will lose an immense amount of wood that way, just by having those cuts a little bit off. You're going to have to plane on each side, and you might lose 1.5 inches of wood, which doesn't seem like a lot, but you can go, 1.5 inches is a 10-inch bowl going down to an 8.5-inch bowl. That's a big size difference. So a long bar completely stops that from happening, because you're sure the bar is going all the way through your log, and you can really get your nice rocking motion, because when you're cutting, you don't just want to go down straight. That demands way too much on the bar. Chainsaws are not meant to cut this way, especially not these chains. Chainsaws are meant to cut perpendicular to the wood, right? Like that. When you cut long like this, you do not want to have the full bar and chain going. What you want to do is you want to rock the saw, right? It's like a dance. So you're going in, and then you're going out, then you're going in, and that allows you to cut with a specific part of the chain every time and not overwhelm the saw. So when you're cutting, you want to start, I always like to start off down so I can mark my line, right? I mark my line, okay, that's the groove in which I'm going down in. Then I'm going to rock my saw forward, and I'm going to tip it up, and that's what's going to cut, and then I'm going to rip out. I'm just going to go like this, vroom, vroom. And that's what's going to allow these big, thick, long shavings to just shoot out of the saw. That's how you want to cut with like this. If you have very soft wood, like pine, spruce, fir, cedar, that really, you can just put the saw in straight and it just goes down. But with here, where I'm from, we don't have that many woods like that. Not conifers. We have leafy trees, the feuillus. So maple, oak, ash, hickory, ironwood, bunch of other stuff, which is very dense and hard wood, and you cannot do that in dense and hard wood. Now, that's the first thing. The second thing is how sharp your chain is. If your chain is off or not sharp, the saw is going to bounce around, and it's going to want to curve when it cuts. If you have a dead straight chain, it will go straight down, and you'll be able to get perfectly good slabs. Now, a lot of people say, well, that doesn't really matter, blah, 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 blah. Look, you do whatever you want, but I'm telling you, when you have a sharp chain, a long bar, and a powerful saw, you can get, out of one log, you can get 5 1.5-inch plate, plate blanks that are perfectly equal across an entire log. But if you have a dull chain that starts curving everywhere you go and you do cross cuts, well, you'll get maybe 2. So it's like any tool. A chainsaw is like any tool, especially when woodworking, and especially making your own blanks instead of buying kiln-dried blanks that are planed and everything. The quality of your saw, what you do with your saw, really matters. Now, you might say, well, this is an old saw. Old chainsaws are kind of a hobby of mine, so that's why it's an old chainsaw, but old chainsaws are great. You just have to make sure they're tuned correctly. You just have to make sure they have the right gas in them, they have nice oil, and you just have to make sure you have a sharp chain. So that is what you need to do. So let's get this started up, and I'm going to be cutting into the wood, and you'll see that rocking motion. I won't be talking much because this does make a lot of sound. It has I cleared the muffler out, so it just makes this nice little boop, 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 boop. So I'm going to not be talking much, but you'll see me do this rocking motion with the saw. All right, so always make sure your brake is on when you start it. I like just setting it down, put it on. See, now this is not fully cut yet. Beautiful long shavings. Oh yeah, that's hickory. Now, I didn't cut this fully through. There's still a little section of wood there. The reason for that is you don't want to cut one section off and then have to do the entire other section, because then the wood is not going to be very stable. Because that's another thing with chainsaws. They will only cut well if the wood is firmly stable. If you have something that's rocking around, the saw is going to bounce around. The saw is going to want to grab. I like an aggressive chain. That's just how I am. They're really good for cutting bucking, right? Which is what I do for a living. But for ripping, they're a little bit less. You can see it bounces a lot. This is also because this is hardwood. Anyway, but if it's not stable, it will want to grab and it will want to pull. And if it pulls, it could put your cut off. It can make your chain move within the groove of the bar, which can then cause damage to the bar and the chain. So what you really, really want to do is make sure you have a nice setup. You put this, you want it solid, and then you want to leave just a half an inch, maybe even a quarter of an inch on each side. Like, I can start to move this, but I'm going to do one side, then the other side, because it's not that bad if you're only cutting 1.5 inches of wood. But if you're cutting the full length, that's not the best. So really always leave a little section at the end, go all the way down to that little section, then move on to the other section, and then just finish them off very quickly, one by one, like bang, bang. And then you get your 2 nice slabs. So we'll do that again. Brake on, because when you start a chainsaw, you want the brake off. Put it on as usual. Hold the gas. Oh, that's another thing. This is a chainsaw tip. Okay. I know a lot of you see, you hold the saw and then you just, you can do that if you want to look cool. You can. You don't need to do that. You don't need to start a chainsaw that way. A chainsaw, I'll start it up. You really don't need that much pressure on the core. You just find your compression. That's it. You don't need violent motions. All right? Alright, now it's loose. You see it starts to move? That's loose. I don't need to cut that anymore. Go on the other side. Starts to move in. When you see the wood start to go in, that means close your saw. Always put your brake back on because safety first. And then, boom. Beautiful. Now, this is the test of seeing if my method actually works. You see that? Look at that. That is just beautifully straight. All right? That's why when you do it enough, you get good at it. And you can also see where the cracks end up. So you can see this split goes all the way up to here. So where's my pencil? I always, oh, there it is. All right, so this split goes up to here. This split goes up to there. So workable wood would be around here for this. But I still want to cut out those sections to get these nice quarter sawn bars. Man, that smells good. And if we look on the big bowl slabs, you can see this split goes up to here. This split goes up to here. Now this is not too bad because this is going to be a live edge bowl. So I'm going to be curving out like this, right? Because I'm going to be making my bowl like this. So these splits should turn out with this type of bowl. So that I'm less worried about. But if we look at the standard bowl blank, the splits go from here, here, and here. I don't know if you guys can see. I'm trying to be, so there's a split there, split there, and a split there. And they're not that deep, so I'm pretty sure with CA glue, I can get the CA in there and just reinforce these. So I think it's fine, so I'll be able to get a nice, big, decent sized bowl. But I will try and aim to have as little of the split as possible. And that's okay. And there's a lot of things that you can mention when processing wood, but the reason it's okay is because this diameter is smaller than this one. So even if I max out this diameter, I'm not going to be having a bowl that's going from there to there. So even, I think, just by eye, and now this is not precise in any way, from there to there, I think my bowl is going to be max there to there. So I only have a little bit of the splits, which is this where the splits are going to be least deep. That's going to actually be problematic. So I'm not too worried about that. Now, so that's how I would, that's how I cut my blanks up. I think this is the simplest way to do it. Now there's a bunch of other ways, right? Depending on what you want. I wanted 2 big bowl blanks and a center slab. That's all I wanted from this log. I didn't want anything more. But if you wanted spindle blanks, you could have also cut this up and just resaw it into little square blanks. You could also do that with that. You can also make smaller bowl blanks. You could get 3-inch boards. You can do whatever you want with your piece of wood. The only constant is this part. This slab is a constant whenever you're doing this kind of work. The constant of having the pift removed. I'm telling you, if you do not remove the pift, the wood will split. This checking happened because this was not processed. If this was cut immediately and then processed immediately, which is what I tend to do with pieces that I spot on the job or when I cut trees down, this would not have happened and these would have been perfectly good bowl blanks. But because it was left sitting, now you have to deal with splits. So if you have wood and you have splits in your wood, and you're like, well, I had this beautiful piece cracked, and you didn't take the pift out, that is your fault. That's not the wood's fault. That is your fault. You didn't process it correctly. Now, if you're like, well, I don't have time to resaw everything I have because I have way too much, then the trick is to leave it in logs like this and leave them long. Give yourself 4 inches of scrap. 4 inches on each side of this will split. That is okay. This will split. I will take those splits out and the rest will be perfect. If you want a 12 by 12 bowl and you cut a 12 by 12 log, I'm telling you right now, if you leave it outside for a year, that bowl will not be a 12 by 12 bowl. It will be a 10 by whatever. 10 by whatever thickness you cut it bowl, because you will have splits. So always remove the pift. With what you do with either side of that center slab, you can do 2 slabs. You can do on one side, you can make one big bowl, and you can resaw 3 boards. You can do whatever you want. But this is a constant, and I didn't do it in the start, and I paid for it with bowls that cracked after a while. And I have people that I know that collect wood that have beautiful pieces, didn't do this kind of thing, and now the wood is garbage, and you can't return it because it's split to crap. So always remove the center slab. Not only that, if you leave the pift in the bowl and then you put it in the wash, or you wash it and you use it, the wood will rehumidify, the tension will come back into the pift, and when you're going to dry it out, the pift will crack open. So you can, with some woods it works, but I always recommend taking the pift out. And some pifts are kind of like ash does this. The pift itself is quite soft. It's like this soft material. It's not hardwood. So if you leave that in your project, well, that also becomes a structural problem. So just take it out. Just take the pift out. That section goes to firewood, right? There's really not much you can do with that little section of pift. So I would just, that I throw away. Everything else I'll keep for bowls. For those who stayed to the end of the video, now I'm going to give you my tips and tricks to how to collect lumber. Now there's many ways to go about it, but in my experience, this is the best way of doing it. There's 2 main ways. One, looking on Marketplace. For us woodworkers, it's kind of hard to imagine that, let's just say you have someone that gets a tree cut down on their property, a nice 4-foot, 20-foot high oak tree, and it gets cut down. For us, it's kind of hard to imagine that the person is not going to want to keep the wood. If I have a tree cut on my yard, I'm telling you right now, that wood is, well, I cut the tree down, but the wood is mine. I'm not giving it away. But you have to realize that not everyone is a woodworker, and not everyone has a wood stove. So even if they don't do projects with wood, they don't necessarily have any use for the wood. So a lot of people get stuck with these massive trunks that maybe the company doesn't want to pick up. Maybe they don't want to have to pay a little bit more to have it hauled out of their yard, because some companies do charge a little bit more to get the wood out, which is totally fine because it is a job to do that. And they don't, anyway, whatever the reason is, some people get stuck with these massive trees in their yard and they don't know what to do with it. So they put it on Marketplace and ask anyone, you want to come pick it up? Just come pick it up. And that's where the money is, people. That's where the money is. That is where you will find all your nice stuff. For example, I've collected a butternut tree. The video will be in the link. It's in the link or it's on the channel. I always forget to put the links. That's my ADHD. But anyway, and that tree was completely found on Marketplace. It was just found on Marketplace, and I collected the whole thing for free. It was a very, very nice tree, and it was, anyway, all by looking on Marketplace. So if you want to collect wood, just look. Not every deal is the best. Some are too far. Some the wood's a little bit sketchy. But you just have to go and check it out. So if it's close by, I'd recommend. It's free. It's close by. You take what you can, and that's it. And you can amass a pretty good collection of lumber just that way. The second, that's the first way. The second method is communicating and finding a local arborist. Now, as an arborist myself, I can tell you, when there's a lot of tree trimmings, maybe not at this season, because as you can see, we're in the middle of winter. In the summer, we cut down a lot of trees, and we could get piles and piles and piles of wood. And some arborists do firewood, and some don't. So some get stuck with huge amounts of quantities of wood, and maybe they don't give it all away, which is 100% fine, because you do have to understand that there's profit to be made in firewood. But if you're a wood turner, I have never met an arborist who isn't nice enough or isn't so passionate about wood, because that's another thing. Arborists don't just like cutting trees down. They like trees. As an arborist myself, it's not just liking chainsaws and cutting. It's a lot about liking trees and nature in general. So when you tell them I make bowls out of the pieces of wood, or I try to recycle pieces of firewood, I've never met an arborist who hasn't said, that is awesome. Do you want anything? So find a local arborist, turn them something, give them a bunch of gifts, whatever. But that's one of the ways to collect wood, is to communicate with your local tree trimmers. For example, this American elm, this actual full cord of wood, was collected that way. An arborist knew me, he knew what I did, thought it was really, really cool, and asked me if I wanted to collect the full trunk. And I said, of course, and now it's here, and I've already turned a bunch of bowls out of it. So that's the second way that I found that is the best way to find wood. And if you're really not wanting to put money into buying blanks or buying planks or whatever, this is the way to do it. You can collect a ton of things, and you never have to really worry about it, because trees get cut down all the time. While as dry kiln blanks are kind of, you have to find the right one, they has to have it in stock. While as you can make whatever size blank you want with trees that you can just find. So that's my advice for you guys. It's worked for me. It might not work for you, but I've had no problems with it, and I think it's a very good system. So try it out. Just scroll on Marketplace once in a while to just check. Find yourself a free weekend, and if you find something, say I could come over this weekend and I can find it, and I can pick it up. So that's my tips and tricks. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So as always, like, comment, subscribe. Tell me if you found pieces of wood this way, and if you find it's also a good method. And as always, happy turning, and we will see you next time.